And you know, sometimes people say, well, why some redneck weed scientist from Arkansas come up here and try to tell us how to farm? I can assure you, I'm not up here to try to tell y'all how to farm. If I know more about farming in Iowa than y'all do, we got a big problem. And I mean, I come from a totally different world. I'm gonna tell you some stories about what's happened to us, both from a weed resistance. I'm gonna do that first and move through that pretty quickly, and then move into the Dicamba thing, and hopefully you'll be looking and seeing what can we do different, or how might our situation be different than theirs, so maybe we won't have as much issue as they've had. Is this feeding back? It sounds like it's feeding back to me a little bit. See if that helps. My voice usually carries pretty good. I'm also not here because Iowa State's program needs shoring up. Not at all. They don't need me up here to shore up their program. I'm just going to kind of tell you what my experiences are, and we'll go from there. I spent 28 years on the University of Arkansas faculty in a what am I trying to say? A position very similar to Mike Owen. Mike Owen and I go back 40 years. I mean, we're almost like brothers. We fight every time we get together, but you know, you better not jump in or you'll have to deal with both of us. But got a long relationship with him, a long relationship with Iowa State. So I'm just up here to tell you our experiences. And 14 years now in the private sector, had a history with a weed called Palmer Amaranth. Hopefully y'all won't get that one. Y'all talk about mare's tail, you talk about giant ragweed, you talk about water hemp. I can assure you, if you want to solve all of those problems real easy, just get you a dose of Palmer Amaranth and it'll do that for you. But it's a different pigweed than we had in the past, and it's kind of interesting when we started seeing that. And I'll tell you how we got into that. But when we started seeing it, at the same time, the guys from the Midwest, we do talk. The Iowa State guys, the Illinois guys were saying, we got a new pigweed too. It's called water hemp, and it don't play fair. Stuff comes up in the shade. It comes up after our pre-emergence breakdown. It comes up after we sprayed our post-emergence treatment. So there's a lot of similarity between those two weeds. So when I'm talking about Palmer Amaranth, you can pretty much take a lot of those things and apply it to water hemp. We've dealt with a lot of other resistant weeds, both in rice and soybeans in Arkansas. I was in on the ground floor of the Roundup Ready crops when I was in my research career. Most fun thing I've done in my entire career. Also, we actually got Liberty Link crops in our research program about a year after we got Roundup Ready. Looked at that till it was kind of put back on the shelf, and then had some experience, not from a direct experience, but more working with our research guys in Arkansas on some of the new traits that are coming along too. And just on the resistance management standpoint, I mean, it's not just a southern problem anymore. It seemed like for some reason bad things happen in the south. Maybe we're just not as smart as y'all are, or I don't know what, but it just seems like that bad things tend to happen in the south first, and then they work their way to the north. And I guess I was a little bit surprised when Mark told me that y'all were just now kind of starting to having to deal with some of these issues, because I know in other parts of Iowa where I've spoken, there have been more weed resistance problems, but y'all are in a great position. I mean, you to learn from what we've done and keep the thing from ever blowing up in your face. To start with, you're getting some new tools to use. There's really no reason for you guys to have to let this thing get out of hand. All you got to do is get smarter than a weed that doesn't have a brain. And you got to get out of the denial thing and that sort of thing. But you know, there's just some things that we'll talk about. The current herbicide situation. Our newest herbicide mode of action is over 30 years old. We'll talk about that a little bit. Y'all have to grasp that. You have to get your hands around that. And you know, we know that glyphosate has failed now on some of our driver weeds. We're getting multiple resistance to multiple modes of action. We're getting more metabolic resistance, and I'm not smart enough to do a lot of explanation between the differences between metabolic and target site resistance, but what we do know is target site resistance is very well understood, and it's pretty easily managed. It happens at one place in the plant, and we understand that very well. Metabolic resistance we don't understand near as well. It happens more holistically in the plant, but one thing we do know about it as plants develop metabolic resistance to certain herbicide modes of action, it makes them more susceptible to developing resistance to the next mode of action much more quickly, or sometimes even at the same time. So what that says is, you know, we got 10 years out of Roundup. We may never get 10 years out of any other herbicide mode of action as long as this metabolic resistance thing continues to develop. So y'all got to nip it in the bud before it ever gets started. And really one of the things we're going to see is we're kind of getting ourselves down to having about 4 technologies left that still work. And so just, you know, prior to Roundup resistant thing, we're simple. We just sprayed Roundup every Monday morning until there wasn't anything out there but the crop we wanted to grow. And especially you guys, where y'all didn't even have to irrigate in a lot of situations. I mean, farming, we all got spoiled. And but that simplicity had a cost. And you know, basically for us, I mean, we were growing Roundup Ready beans, Roundup Ready cotton, Roundup Ready corn, and life was good. But that simplicity had a cost, and when things blew up in our face starting in about 2006, that cost was about $150 an acre. Whether it was hand weeding, whether it was herbicides, whether it was a combination of herbicides and hand weeding, or what have you. So just a little bit of history in my career. I told you our last new herbicide mode of action was over 30 years old, but when I started my career at the University of Arkansas as a graduate student, the new herbicide screening program was bigger than all the rest of our weed science program put together. And I would say that would have pretty much been true at any land-grant university. The pipeline was full. There was probably 20 or so companies that were screening for new herbicides. They were letting university people have them earlier. They were letting university people do a lot of their screening for them. And I mean, they were coming at us from everywhere. The first half of my career, we had trouble getting enough graduate students to do justice to all the new herbicides that were coming at us to be able to write recommendations for our farmers. And all of a sudden, that came to a screeching halt about 30 years ago. And all of us, people still tell me all the time, companies will come up with something. I hope so. They always have. And we always assumed it would be that way. But fact is, the last new true herbicide mode of action is over 30 years old. And there's a little bit of smoke in the chimney maybe. But I think anything you would see, we're probably looking at everything we're going to have for the next 10 years. And so it, you know, the onus is on you to make sure that that we make these things work. And I just picked pigweed and said in the ideal world, those are the modes of action that would have activity on pigweed, whether you're talking about water hemp or whether you're talking about Palmer amaranth. And you can go down through there and look at those. I'm not going to read them to you. But if all of those were still working, I wouldn't be here. I mean, you guys wouldn't need me at all. But my first Palmer amaranth experience, when I came to Arkansas in 1974, we were a Cuckabur morning glory state. We had been a grass pigweed state. It was a different pigweed, but a miracle herbicide in my high school career came out called Treflan. And I can remember it like it was yesterday. And all of the farmers and all the ingenuity of how to do tillage and apply herbicide at the same time. Everybody had their own philosophies about that. But we very quickly solved the grass and herbicide problem, grass and pigweed problem in the day. And what happened? You started getting we started getting just a species shift to a different weed. In fact, I was taught by well-meaning professors we would never have herbicide resistance because weeds couldn't make generations quickly enough compared to a bug or a disease. Turns out they were wrong. But what we would get was a species shift to something Treflan didn't control. You wind up in the same place. You still wind up with something you can't kill. But anyway, Cuckabur and Morning Glory had taken over the soybean production in the South. And my boss called me in the first day on the job and he said, I want the Cuckaburs out of the soybeans on Highway 67. I never knew what Highway 67 had to do with anything. But I did know that we had some novel competition research coming along. So for the first time we could tell a farmer, if you had this many Cuckaburs, it cost you this much yield. This whole thing about, yeah, I had Cuckaburs, but I still made 30 bushel was out the window. And I also knew there was another miracle herbicide coming along called Basagran. And I thought if I mess that up, then I deserve to be fired. And so our whole program was developed around research for cuckleburr morning glory control. If you brought me a new herbicide that wouldn't kill a cuckleburr, it really didn't have any place. And I was doing a grower meeting in a crowd about like this pretty early in my career. Thought I knew about everything. Had one of them PhDs, you know, and into this talk, a farmer stuck up his hand and said, "We're not killing pigweeds with Treflan." And I thought, man, can't y'all ask me something harder than that? You're either not putting enough or you're not incorporating it right. And so we had a little mini course on how to do that. And I went back the next year and I did the same talk. And farmers are interesting folks. I love working with farmers. That's all I've ever done. Same farmer got up and walked right up here beside me with a notepad. Well, my notes on it from the year before, and he said, "Okay, young man, I did exactly what you told me to do, and I grew up again, now what?" Well, that'll bring your PhD-itis down considerably in front of about 100 people. And I said, well, that the only thing I could think of was I got me a new backpack sprayer now. You just give me a half acre in your worst field, and if you'll incorporate my treatments and plant my beans for me, I'll come show you boys how to do it. And so they did, and I did. I went back about 2 weeks later to admire my work. And the only two reasons I got out of the truck were, one, to pull up my University of Arkansas signs before anybody else saw them, and two, to tell him to disc it up before anybody else saw it, because I hadn't killed anything either. We discovered two things. We discovered, A, we had a new pigweed called Palmer Amaranth. We also discovered we had dinitroanilin resistant or Treflan resistant Palmer Amaranth at the same time. So by the time we figured out what we already had resistance to one mode of action. And so we can take it off of the chart. I'm going to show you this same chart several times that I showed you a while ago that would be good in the real world. Kind of wondering what we're going to do. The next miracle herbicide called Scepter came out. Y'all probably use Pursuit up here. Scepter was kind of the southern version of the Pursuit because it was better on cuckleburr and it was friendlier in our rice rotation. And actually I moved to research. I'm a glutton for punishment. So, I mean, they got me once, but I moved a research site to that location because that weed got my attention very quickly over how quickly it would take over a field of cuckleburr, for example, that we thought was the most competitive weed that there is. It is one-on-one, but pigweeds don't play one-on-one. The drought tolerance of it was amazing. It's a pretty amazing weed. And so we moved a research location up there. And 2 years in a row when Scepter came out, we thought we had cut a fat hog. And pigweed problem is over. And they went about 2 to 3 years and they were done. Target site resistance took Scepter and Pursuit right out of the picture for us before we really got off of the ground with them good. So now we've got DNA resistant Palmer Amaranth, we've got ALS resistant Palmer Amaranth, and so we've taken another one off of the list, and Roundup Ready came out. Most fun day I ever had at that research location where the Palmer Amaranth was demonstrating that we could kill Palmer Amaranth as big as I could walk through holding a spray boom over my head. If I could fight my way through them, we could kill them that big. I mean, that was a fun day. And I'm not going to sit up here and tell y'all what all Roundup Ready did for farming. I mean, it was a miracle, and you know, we're all looking for the next one, but we were bumping off from that point. I became a rice weed scientist because you didn't need a weed scientist in cuckleburr on the brain, in cotton or soybeans once Roundup Ready came out in those early days. You guys didn't need to call a weed scientist for anything. And so it made a rice weed scientist out of me, but along about 2006, we started noticing that our fields just weren't squeaky clean like they had been before, just a weed here and there. And interestingly enough, it was always Palmer Amaranth. And it was Palmer Amaranth in areas that when I went through the fight the first time, they were strictly on some of our sandy soils in just a few counties. Now, where they were bad. Statewide, they were not an issue at all. They weren't on our good cotton soils. They weren't in our rice rotation. But everywhere we started seeing these escapes, it was Palmer Amaranth. And kind of got a little story to tell about that with a research component with it. But you just start noticing a single weed in a field. And it's real easy to say, as under a clod or We just missed it for a lot of different reasons. First place, if you see it, go pull the cotton picking thing up before it makes a seed. But we didn't do any of that. We didn't think twice about it. And showing you a picture of Elvira, and I know it's a funny looking crop to y'all, but it could have just as easily been soybeans. But we started seeing these weeds go into seed, and a couple of years into that, they had a meeting in Arkansas called the Pigposium, of all things. And they were hoping to get 200 people show up, and 800 showed up to talk about one weed. If that doesn't get your attention, made it real interesting for the caterer too, because they played for 200. They bought every can of potted meat and stick of bologna and whatever in 2 counties to try to feed everybody. But they had a Palmer Amaranth on display, and they named her Elvira, and they gave away a shotgun for the person that closest guessed the number of seed Elvira made. And I can assure you it was a graduate student that had to count them. It wasn't a professor. You know, sometimes you have to explain the difference between having your degree and working on one. And it'd be who got to count the Palmer Amaranth seed, 1.8 million seed on one plant. Now that doesn't mean every Palmer Amaranth plant makes a 1.8 million seed, but they are very prolific seed producers. So then about the next year, we started seeing spots in fields. And then we knew what was going on. And actually this is a research plot that Jason Norsworthy took that same concept, and he took 40 highly resistant Palmer Amaranth seed and planted them in a meter square area. And this again happened to be cotton, but in an area that had no Palmer Amaranth in it whatsoever. And what he was doing was simulating the seed drop from one resistant weed that went to seed the year before. And when you start seeing spots in fields, you can send them in and have them tested if you want to, but I can just pretty much tell you what the results are going to be when they come back. And that had normal tillage and had 3 applications of Roundup and Roundup only, or glyphosate only, because we're representing a hard-headed farmer here that wouldn't change his program to add some residuals or do some things differently. The next year we started seeing streaks in fields, and farmers started firing spray rig operators and spray companies left and right. Old Joe's always been about wide swathing, and boy, this year he did me a number. And so hired somebody else to come in and spray the streaks, and put a quart on them and nothing happened. Put a half a gallon on them and nothing happened. Put a gallon on them and nothing happened. And it turns out they weren't sprayer streaks at all. They were combine streaks from the year before. It's where the combine had hit that spot that I showed you in this previous slide, and that's what you've got here, where the harvester hit that same spot I showed you earlier in the research plot and scattered them from one end of the field to the other. Well, at that point we had about a 50-50 divide. About half of our guys were streakers and still believed that somebody was streaking up the field. The other half said, well, maybe them university guys are right, but this program is so cheap, I know I can get by one more year. I'm eventually going to have to change my program, but I know I can get by one more year. And one more year took us out. That's the next year in that same cotton field. And I think they found 2 bowls of cotton in it when they bush hogged it. That is solid Palmer Amaranth. And we had field after field after field in the state of Arkansas that looked like that we didn't put combines in. So if you want to solve your mare's tail and water hemp problem, just get you a big dose of Palmer and it'll do it for you. And you know, people tell me all the time, well, I still got to have Roundup in my weed control program because it controls 200 different weed species. Yeah, you still need probably Roundup in your weed control program. Palmer Amaranth also controls 200 weed species. So anyway, now what? After Roundup Ready quit, and now that was about 2011, somewhere 2011, 2012 for us. And our guys that didn't go out of business said, we got to do some things differently. We let it get this bad before we started trying to turn it around. And 2 things happened that helped us start to turn this thing back around a little bit. One, Liberty Link came along, and I really thought our farmers would proactively move to that as a way to save a lot of their utility of glyphosate. I missed that one by a country mile. They just didn't want any part of it. Most of our Liberty Link beans weren't planted until a guy failed to harvest a year before. Some of our guys were hard-headed enough they had to fail to harvest 2 years in a row. And if they survived, then they thought maybe we need to try something different. But otherwise what we did, and again, most of our seed were still Roundup Ready. So I mean, most of the state was still going to be planted in Roundup Ready seed regardless of what we did. So what would we do to shore that up? We started looking at residuals. We started overlapping residuals. We started looking at multiple modes of action of residuals. But the only thing we had to really shore up with were the PPO inhibitors. And again, our guys were still looking for an easy way to farm. So what they basically did is just kept planting Roundup Ready beans and put out Valor, followed it by Flexstar. And we actually did pretty well with that for 2 or 3 years in a row. We cut record, we started turning this thing back around. We cut record soybean yields in probably 13, 14 in through there. And then guess what? The PPO inhibitors started failing. And one of the things that's been a little bit different about the PPO inhibitors failing in the South, I think, compared to up here, when Flexstar and Blazer and what have you quit working for us post-emergence, the Valors, prefixes, those herbicides also pretty much quit working for us pre-emergence, where, you know, at least Owen and the guys in Illinois and whatever tell me that, you know, hey, where we're getting failures post-emergence, we're still getting 70, 80% control pre, and it's kind of worth a go. But you're still kind of putting that same selection pressure out there. You still kind of got to get smarter than the weed that doesn't have a brain. So we haven't marked the PPO inhibitors off of that list everywhere, but north of Interstate 40, we have. So, I mean, are you starting to see a pattern here? What we're doing, we're using up technologies one at a time, because when we find something that works, we use it till it doesn't work anymore. And we got to quit that. And so north of Interstate 40 for us, I mean, you can mark all of those out. So we're marking them off one at a time, and we're not getting any new ones. And the arithmetic there comes out all wrong. It actually gets a little bit worse than that. If you just want to talk about the state of the union on herbicides. I know you guys have atrazine resistance. I never dreamed we'd be using as much metribuzin in soybeans as we're having to use now. People don't like it. They'd really rather use something else, but we kind of don't have a choice. And so we've not seen any metribuzin yet, but I know atrazine resistant water hemp exists. How common? Y'all would know that better than me. So I didn't draw a line all the way through the PS to the photosystem 2 or the group 5 herbicides, but I drew a little bit of a line. The group 15s, we've leaned very heavily on warrant, dual, zidua, and for not only grass control, but they're not great pigweed herbicides, but if we can get 60 or 70% out of them, then that's a start. We can kind of build on that. There's no doubt in my mind we're seeing a decrease in activity, especially with dual, on Palmer Amaranth in Arkansas. I don't know about Iowa, John, but I know when I talked to Hager and those guys, and there's some real concerns about whether or not these group 15 herbicides that we're leaning on hard are either losing activity or fixing to fold up around our feet. I hope not. But I didn't put a red line through that one. I didn't put a red line through glufosinate yet. I mean, every year we hear some stories or get a scare that maybe we've got our first Liberty resistant weed documented or what have you. Hadn't been proven yet, but I can tell you this, if we continue to over-depend on it like we're having to in some areas, it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. So and then going down to some of the new stuff we got. Group 4s, 2,4-D and Dicamba. I mean, we already have resistance to those weeds documented. It's not widespread yet, but you say, well, how long is it going to take for resistance to develop? Hey, it's already out there. We got to manage it. So same thing with the group 27s or the HPPD inhibitors, and those last two groups are where all of our new technology is. So, folks, I mean, we got to get smarter than a weed that doesn't have a brain, or we're going to run out of technology. I mean, we're basically, to me, an annual grass resistance away from some of this stuff really folding up around our feet, especially depending on what we can still get out of glyphosate. And if you look worldwide, there's a lot more annual grasses resistance to glyphosate than there are broadleaf weeds. And I think one of the reasons that it hadn't happened to us yet is we are using the dual residuals, a lot of pre-emergence residual grass herbicides in our program. For gosh sakes, keep doing that. But you know, I'm concerned at home that if we don't get a whole lot smarter than we are, we could be 5 years away from having some fields we can't grow soybeans in. And I think for you guys it would obviously be longer. I mean, Owen says we got just enough more diversity than y'all have that it's not going to get as bad up here. I mean, I hope he's right, but how can you take a chance on that? So what's it going to take to win? And I'm going to move through this pretty quick and get on to what we came to do. One, we can't continue to try to solve a herbicide problem with the next new herbicide. You know, we could do that for a long time. I mean, before when we were getting resistance, we got complacent because we had two things coming along were better than what we had anyway. So we got very complacent there. You're going to have to do some things other than just trying to look for the next new silver bullet in a herbicide to try to solve, to try to totally manage weed resistance. Did I do that or did you do that? Okay, I started. Well, I'm so used to screwing stuff up here. I'm gun shy, but I'm not gonna go through all of those. I mean, those are things you can tailor make to yourself. But you know, when I say use your crop rotation wisely, I mean, yeah, you guys are gonna go corn and soybeans for the most part, but at least be smart in the herbicides you use in corn, that you don't have the option to use in soybeans. Just simple mixing modes of action and things that you can do there. Tillage diversity, you know, and you're going to say, I don't know if you're a no-tiller, it sucks coming up here to tell us to get out of no-till. No, but I can tell you this, we have used tillage at home, deep tillage at home in some cases to turn around some of these train wreck fields we had, because we know pigweeds are very shallow germinators, and we know their soil seed bank life is not as long as some of the other weeds. So, you know, is there something there you can use for diversity? We have moldboard plowed some fields and then went right back to a no-till or a conservation tillage program in them. I mean, nice presentation in the other meeting this morning on cover crops. We were doing some of that before. Problem was, before Roundup Ready, we couldn't kill a cotton picking cover crop. And then once Roundup Ready came out, we decided we didn't need them anymore. Well, we're going back and looking at some of that stuff, and we've got some farmers that are using cereal rye especially pretty nicely in their program, at least helping some to manage this problem. And zero tolerance. I mean, you just simply can't let the things go to seed. You know, mare's tail's different. I mean, it blows around. You can't do a lot with it. But I tell people that mare's tail's kind of like a hemorrhoid. I mean, it's a pain in the rear, but it ain't going to take you out. Palmer amaranth or water hemp can take you out. We'll figure out how to deal with the mare's tail issue. But and then harvest weed seed control. You're going to hear a little bit more about that, and I'm just going to basically touch on it. But you know, if you think about it, outside of mare's tail, we're essentially planting your next crop of weeds right back in the same field when you run the harvester through it. And Norsworthy did some work on this, on how much seed retention there is on Palmer amaranth. I would have bet the farm that you'd have had so much shattering with Palmer amaranth that this would not work at all. That's why you do research. I mean, they're finding out that the Palmer amaranth plants are holding about 99% of their seed to go in the combine. Well, when they go in the combine, they come out the back of the combine. And you planted next year's Palmer amaranth or next year's water hemp crop right behind the combine. You know, there's been a lot of work done on different ways. A lot of this came from Australia out of the ryegrass control program. But one of the things that we've got some guys doing this, one is just putting a very simple set of diverters behind the combine. Instead of spreading everything, they're just packing it as tight a windrow as they can, and then they're burning the windrows in the fall. And I know that won't work a lot of places. Won't even work a lot of places in Arkansas. But, you know, really you get them things all in a nice windrow and, you know, kind of get done harvesting, and get your significant other out there with a case of beer or whatever, burn windrows, and I mean, it's more fun than you might think it might be. And they're doing a lot of research in the area of how much of the weed seed does it actually burn up, and what are the temperatures? I mean, there's some real research going into this thing, and it's been pretty effective. Another thing they've done in Australia is pull chaff carts behind the combine. Just pull you a chaff cart, and when it gets full, haul it out of the field and dump it. I don't think y'all are ready for that yet. I can kind of tell by the look on some of your faces. You're not ready to pull a chaff cart behind your combine yet. The other thing they've done in Australia is they invented a machine called a Harrington weed seed destructor. Had been a lot of attempts at that all the way back to the old scour cleans, but pretty effective. And a lot of the systems would destroy weed seed, they just wouldn't live. This system will destroy weed seed, and apparently it's very reliable. It's a double cage mill concept that came out of the mining industry. Again, over there it started out being a pull behind unit. Yeah, y'all are not ready to pull a Harrington weed seed destructor behind your combine. Neither are our guys in Arkansas. But they've taken it a step further, and they figured out now how to put it in the back of the combine, to put that thing in the back of the machine, so all of a sudden you're not pulling anything. And there's really, of course, anything that happens, there's always lawsuits and patent issues and all of that. And so there's kind of two different companies sort of going two different ways. But those guys have come over here. There's actually a couple of those stationary units that different universities have. And they came over here all full of vim, vam, and vigor to get it going in our combines. And they figured out first that a lot of our combines, and I could be wrong on this, but we're class 7s maybe, when in Australia they're 8s, 9s, and 10s. We think we're the biggest in everything, and we find out we're not. And then the other thing they saw right off the bat, all of y'all's combines have hydraulic rear wheel assist, which you don't need any. You could run car tires in Australia, and we don't have enough capacity to run the Destructor and the rear wheel assist, etc. So they're kind of back to the drawing board. But the point is, there's some stuff that Norsworthy did where they just took unprocessed soybean chaff and ran it through that stationary destructor. They put all kind of different weed seed in it and whatever, and ran it through that destructor. And there's a picture of what it looked like after it came out versus the stuff they didn't run through. And also comes out with what the weed population looked like from where they ran the stuff through the destructor and where they didn't. So there's just some things there that you got to get your hands around, and we got to do some things different. But get out of herbicides now, and still herbicide and herbicide trait diversity is going to be where it's a lot of what we do is going to happen. And we've just got to get more diversity in both the pre-emerge and post-emergence part of our weed control programs. It's easy to get more diversity in the pre-emergence part. There's several different pre-emerge modes of action. You can mix them, you can overlap them, and all of that. That's easy. But to get more post-emergence diversity is a little bit more of a challenge, especially with the PPOs kind of caving in like they have. So, to me, we hear a lot of talk on residuals. Please use them. Mixed modes of action, overlap them, do all of that. But ultimately, you've got to plant a technology you can control the weeds in post-emergence, because that's your last line of defense. And pre-emerges and soil residual herbicides can fail for a lot of different reasons. And then when they fail and you've planted a wrong trait or a wrong technology, you have no fallback position. So, you gotta plant things you can control weeds in, and we're kind of down to Dicamba, the HPPDs, glufosinate, and 2,4-D, and they're all in competing traits. In the real world, they would have all come in the ideal world. They would have all come in a molecular stack, and all the companies could kind of figure out how to steal from each other, but we'd have all of those traits in a stack, and then we'd have a lot more rotation options than we have with them being in competing traits. But that's what we've got. So we're going to have to go forward with that. And one of the concerns I have about weed resistance, I'm confident at home that we're losing some ground the last couple of years simply over the argument about Liberty Link versus Extend. I think our farmers are getting focused. Do I plant Liberty Link or do I plant Extend? And that's all they're thinking about. And all of a sudden, we're trying to fix a herbicide problem with the next new herbicide instead of getting away from some of these principles of rotation and doing some of these things we have to do. But anyway, you got to have choices and you've got to be proactive. I mean, you know, if you're changing your program before you're forced to, then you're in control. If you let the weeds force you to change your program, then the weeds are in control. And I tell everybody you need to have a nice, at least 5-year plan. And I don't know any of us that get rewarded for having a nice 5-year plan. Most all of us, regardless of whether you're a farmer, a company guy, a dealer, or whatever, you're getting rewarded over what happened this year. But we got to get beyond that and think longer term. Now I'm going to just kind of move into weed control at present, but I'm going to start out and give you a glimpse at some of the new technologies coming along. And you know, your local people can do that for you locally better than me. I'm going to show you some stuff out of Arkansas, but I just want to talk just a little bit about some of the things that are coming and why I think it's important that all of these technologies have to be developed. I mean, we can't depend on anything anymore. And this particular one, didn't pick it for any given reason, it is I guess it would be, I don't know whether it's a Bayer trait or whose trait it's going to wind up being now, but it's Balanced GT stacked with Liberty Link. And I've never been a big Balanced GT fan by itself because, again, if it fails, you have no fallback position. But when they stack it with Liberty Link, you poll an awful lot of the weed scientists around the country. They like that technology awful well. Something that's got Roundup tolerance, it's got Liberty tolerance, and it's got HPPD tolerance. And that's an untreated check in one of those fields. And that would be, let me think what was used there, dual metribuzin and balance, and then it's had an application of Liberty. And the thing about balance is, it's not that great of a pigweed herbicide, but it's very synergistic when you start mixing metribuzin with it, or even better, group 15 with metribuzin. Probably the best, if you balance metribuzin and something like dual, is the best pre-emergence pigweed herbicide I've ever seen if you get a rain on it to activate it. Now, our rainfall frequencies are not as good as your guys. So when we put out a pre-emergent home, we already know we got a 50-50 chance at best at getting it activated. But anyway, a lot of potential there. Same study, 2017. The first picture I showed you was from 2016. Same study from 2017, untreated checks. Actually, it's in the same location. Same treatment that I showed you a while ago, same results. But do you see anything wrong with the soybeans? Cupped, that famous word, cupped. And actually, that's a research location on the farm, Mississippi, in Crittenden County, Arkansas. That happened very early in our experience with Dicamba off-target movement this summer. And it pretty much know where it came from. It came from 2 miles away. And they followed it on, that's the farmer's field in the background. And once you've looked at this stuff, I mean, the cut beans kind of take on a blue color, a bluish color to me. I mean, you can spot them a mile away. And if you look at those beans in the background, that's what you're looking at. That was a very obvious misapplication. I mean, that one was physical drift, no question about it. I mean, the guy violated about everything under the sun. But it was 2 miles from where he put it out to there, and I don't know how much further it went from there. Okay, change locations, and I'm going to have a drink of water. Moving the research location about 5 miles down the road, we had another research guy that was doing a systems comparison between Liberty Link, what would that be, Enlist and Extend. I wish y'all hadn't named those so close together, but I hang up on the E's. But Enlist and Extend. And basically what they did, they had an untreated check, and then they had 3 levels of residual control, or 3 levels of residual herbicides, you know, just kind of increase something from a little bit to more. and then the respective post-emergence treatment put over the top of that. The reason they didn't have the balanced GT Liberty Link, the reason I had to show you it separately is just simply some of the contracts and things that were assigned would not allow it to be put in that study. But that's an untreated check in the Liberty Link side. And again, if you want to solve all the rest of your weed control program, just get you that kind of Palmer Amaranth infestation and you got it. That would be the center. It was a 4-row plot. The center, all 4 rows were treated with a pre-emerge. This was the basic pre-emerge treatment, which was just simply Valor alone. The 2 rows on the right were sprayed with a Liberty, and because this was the Liberty Link portion of the test. I show you that for 2 reasons. 1, is capable of very good weed control. 2, do you see anything wrong with the soybeans? 5 miles down the road, they're cut and they're short. And again, and we'll talk about that some more, as are the trees, as are the soybeans in the background. And actually the location for that, if you were looking the other way from the plots looking in that direction, you're looking at the city of Marion, Arkansas, which had an awful lot of tree damage and things that we'll get into a little bit more. But there's an untreated check in the enlist part of the program. Same pre-emergence treatment, I think Valor alone, and just followed by the normal. I think it just had the Roundup 2,4-D. I don't think it even had any Liberty in the plot. But again, very good weed control. Here's the untreated check moving a little bit further across. There's the extend part of the study. Same treatment. Valor by itself, 1 or 2 applications of it would have been Ingenia in this particular case. Outstanding weed control. See a difference in the soybeans. Very obvious difference. And all of that injury occurred in those soybeans before they ever sprayed any Dicamba or any of those treatments out there. The injury that I was showing you in the trial strictly came from somewhere else. And then I think I got one other technology I wanted to show you that wasn't a part of any of those, but the new HT3 trait that will be what? Dicamba, Liberty, and Roundup. And I don't even actually know what any of the treatments are out there. That was just one of the research trials that Norsworthy had that, and I keep talking about Nord, just one of our University of Arkansas research guys, looking at various combinations and various ways to put out the different components that are out there. I mean, we're looking forward to getting that technology. I like the 2,4-D technology for our situation awful well too, but at least if we get the stack, then we got more options in how we use the Dicamba or how we don't have to use the Dicamba and can mix some Liberty Roundup in there with the thing to take some of the pressure off of it. So that's just some of the new stuff that's coming along. And now I'm just going to go into what happened to us. And I'm not here to tell you that's what's going to happen to you. I'm not here to be critical of anybody. I have no axes to grind. I just speak from the heart. And I'm just going to show you what's happened to us. I'm going to tell you why I think it's happened to us. Everybody's not going to agree with me. You don't have to agree with me. But we're just going to go from there. 2017, when the calls first started coming in, got something wrong with soybeans. Come out here and look at them. Go out there and look at them and you say, yep, you got Dicamba injury on them. Pretty much be assured it came from that field right over there. I mean, pretty much looking at drift patterns, you just go down your checks. I mean, we look at a lot of drift in Arkansas because we got half the U.S. rice acreage. We're still a pretty good sized cotton state. Those two crops don't get along. From a weed control standpoint, we do a ton of stuff with airplanes in Arkansas. We got clear field and non-clear field rice. Those two don't get along with airplanes. I mean, so we've been used to dealing with a lot more drift issues in Arkansas than a lot of other states have. But anyway, you get called and you go out there and you look at it and you say, yeah, you can see the wind angle right across the field. Look over behind the tree line. The beans are perfect over there behind the tree line. I mean, it's obvious what I'm calling A to B movement. And I think there's no doubt in my mind that A to B movement can happen from 2 different things. One is just physical drift. You can do something about that. No doubt in my mind also that part of the A to B movement we were looking at was volatility. In fact, we had a lot of farmers say, hey, I was sitting in the road when my neighbor sprayed. The wind was 5 to 7 away from my beans. I never gave it a second thought. I went on and worried about something else. Look at them now. And volatility patterns, not quite as well defined as drift patterns. They tend to be a little more random. They'll tend to run the draws. They'll tend to follow the low places, settle into the low places, that kind of thing. But if it's A to B movement, you can just still kind of pick it out. You're driving down the road, this field's injured, that one's not, probably A to B movement. But what happened to us then is about 14 to 21 days later, it was like somebody set off a Dicamba bomb at 50,000 feet. I mean, all of a sudden, every field, if it was not an extend field, looked exactly the same. No pattern, really not much difference in symptomology. I mean, the symptomology was amazingly uniform. I'd say 30 to 60% if you were rating plots. I mean, stuff that looked that bad. And in some places it was multi-county wide. If you'd have come to Crittenden County, Mississippi County, we're talking about northeast Arkansas up and down the Mississippi River, West Tennessee, actually the Mississippi Delta on the Mississippi side, up through the Boot Heel of Missouri. If I'd have held a gun to your head the 1st of July, you could have not found me a non-extend soybean field that didn't have dicamba symptoms in it. And you know, people say, hey, you're sensationalizing, it's been overblown. No. And you know, and I've tried to depict it. I can't. I mean, you would have just have to have seen it. But anyway, there's just an example. But they weren't all that bad. I picked this example because this one started out to be A to B movement. It came from a cotton field right across the road the first time it got hit. But what happened was it got hit multiple times, and we'll get into why. And another reason I picked that example, the farmer that hit it the first time, they're good friends, they're neighbors. He called his insurance company and he said, I know I did it. He said, I'm not sure how I did it, but I did it, and I want him compensated. Insurance company drug it out, wrote him a letter and said, the field got hit from multiple sources, there's obvious volatility involved, we ain't paying. And that's been a pretty much of a bone of contention at home. But that's kind of what some of them look like. Little bit of trick photography there, but that's back in those plots I was showing you earlier that had the Liberty Link, the Enlist, and the Extend beans all in them together. And we were out there that day, and they took a picture of me. They didn't have a very good subject to work with, but they took a picture of me over in the Liberty Link side, and one of them panorama things that I don't even know how to do. And while they were doing the panorama, I ran out of it and ran around and got in the Extend side. And you can see the difference there. And I show you that picture just simply to say, if you were driving 70 miles an hour down any road in those counties in Arkansas you wanted to drive July 1, that was kind of the differences you would be looking at. If the beans were waist high and lapped up good, they were Extend. If they were boot top high, half knee high, you could shoot a rabbit 300 yards across any of them, they were not Extend. And so anyway, so what I'm going to do is switch from talking about A to B movement to what I'm calling a landscape effect. And the landscape effect being that effect I showed you, that all of our fields at one point basically all look the same, from Mississippi to West Tennessee, northeast Arkansas to the Boot Heel of Missouri, and talk about what's that not, and what do I think it is, and some of the other guys. So first place, I don't think landscape effect was caused by physical drift, and we'll talk about why. I also don't think it was volatiles that were blowing from A to B, because you can't blow something as far as you think you can before you blow it away. You also can't blow it uniformly. I mean, if you're drifting something in the wind or you got volatiles moving in the wind, you're going to have a degradation from high to low the further you go. And before you go all that far, you're just going to blow it to hell and gone, and the dilution is so great that it gets out of there and it leaves. So I'm saying it's not physical drift, and I'm saying it's not volatiles blowing from A to B. A lot of reasons have been offered for what's going on. And I'll tell you right off the bat that I believe some of all of those apply. I mean, one is just blatant label violations. I hope it's not that way up here, and it's not necessarily widespread at home, but I never dreamed I would see as much just blatant disregard for other people's crops. And that doesn't just have to do with dicamba. I mean, it just seems like as farming at home has got tighter and tighter, and as farmers have got bigger and bigger, they start out trying to do good, and then all of a sudden they get behind, and then all of a sudden it's, my stuff's got to be sprayed, and I'm fixing to spray it, and whatever happens, happens. And again, that's not widespread, and I hope there's none of that up here. But unfortunately, that's some of what we're dealing with. The other one then is what I'm calling is honest label violations. You say, well, what's an honest label violation? I mean, if you look at those, if you look at the dicamba labels, they're very complex. I mean, anybody that thinks that going out and spraying an auxin herbicide in the summertime is just like going out and spraying any other herbicide you want to spray, you're in for a heck of a surprise. I mean, those labels are complicated. They're very difficult to follow. And we had a lot of guys that I'm confident that thought they were following them, or they were just simply following to the best of their ability and saying that's the best we can do. But then if you wanted to go out there and behind them and say, well, you know, obviously the boom was too high, obviously it was a buffer violation, obviously it was a wind speed violation, no doubt some of that existed. Sprayer contamination, sure. And, you know, I tell people all the time, you'll figure out how to clean out a sprayer with dicamba, or you'll buy a separate sprayer to put out dicamba with. I mean, that you'll figure that one out one way or the other. I heard there was some aerial application done, and I can tell you we got some pretty crazy aerial applicators. Nothing has been documented that anybody put out any by air. There was one guy bragging that he would. I think there were obviously, and you hear everything, but that actually a farmer carried some, what did he put it in? I think he put it in Liberty jugs of all things, and carried it to his applicator to get him to put it out. And luckily the guy smelled a rat and didn't do it. But so none of that's been documented. There was some noise made about contaminated herbicides, you know, glufosinate contaminated with dicamba or this or that. I mean, that really hasn't been proven, and it doesn't explain, again, a landscape effect across a whole bunch of different kind of soybeans, conventional beans, Roundup Ready beans, Liberty Link beans, what have you. Illegal formulations. Did some illegal formulation to get sprayed? Sure they did. I'm sure they did. You know, I mean, everybody figured out in 2016 when we didn't have the new formulations labeled that, yeah, I mean, Banville and Clarity will do just as good a weed control job as the new formulations, and are a whole heck of a lot cheaper. They even made the claim, and we didn't use anything but Ingenia in Arkansas, and I may get around to explaining that if I don't answer a question about it, but most people are do-right people. And if you look at most of the survey information, and there's just not a lot of evidence to say that there was a significant amount of the illegal formulations being sprayed. I don't think anybody knows what that percentage is. BASF said that there was only enough Ingenia, what I want to say, documented or accounted for to spray about half of the extend crops in Arkansas. That could leave the impression the other half was illegal application, but really we had a lot of soybeans planted in Arkansas that the farmer never had any intention of spraying. They either planted them out of self-defense, or they wanted the varieties and had no reason to. They were still doing fine in the Roundup Ready program. They had no reason to want to put any dicamba on them. So when we got west of Crowley's Ridge in Arkansas, we had an awful lot of an awful lot of extend beans that simply didn't get sprayed. But all of those can explain individual situations, and all of that's got to be corrected. And all of that can be done with educational programs, ball bats, and what have you. But again, and I'm going to get into what I believe, but I've been walking drift complaints for 43 years, and that doesn't mean I'm the best at it. It doesn't mean I'm always right. But I'm going to tell you what I believe is just use common logic. The only way you can get a landscape effect, in other words, the only way you can get a uniform rate of a herbicide, you got to get a uniform rate distributed over a large area to get a uniform level of symptomology over a large area. And then simply, how do you get the herbicide spread over a large area? I've already said that I simply don't believe you can blow it from A to B, and I don't believe anything in the previous slide I showed you explains a landscape effect. It can explain individual fields or individual areas, but not countywide or multiple countywide areas that look exactly the same. So in my opinion, every time we've ever got into that situation before, it was an atmospheric loading effect, and some people say, well, that doesn't exist. That's a poor terminology. Maybe it is, but go to the literature. I mean, it's been documented through the literature. There is such a thing, but it happens in stable air. In other words, it happens in inversions, or it tends to happen in zero winds as opposed to happening on windy days. So you say, okay, the problem was temperature inversions. Okay, now, let's say, okay, it is atmospheric loading and temperature inversions. We've had a lot of experience with that with 2,4-D and cotton. And most of the time, the 2,4-D is being sprayed with airplanes, and they're getting it hung up in temperature inversions early in the morning. That's physical, ultra-fine spray particles. They're getting in the inversion and hanging up and moving in mass. You got to move it in mass to get it over a large area. That's very common with airplanes, or 4 or 5 airplanes working in the same area in the same inversion. I simply don't believe you can get enough ultrafines with ground equipment, A, to cause the problem. B, I don't believe you can get enough area sprayed with ground equipment in a given inversion to cause the type of landscape effect that we've seen. And everybody's wanting to write regulations to keep people from spraying in inversions, making the assumption that it's physical spray particles moving in those inversions, and I just simply don't believe that. Now, you can choose to believe whatever you want to. Other people say, well, it's dry particles after water evaporates. Anytime you start spraying herbicides in 90-degree weather, more bad things that happen from spray than compared to spraying herbicides in 70-degree weather. I mean, you got thermals coming up off of the ground, you got spray droplets evaporating, you got all kind of things going on besides volatility if the herbicide tends to be volatile. So some people are saying, well, you got dry particles moving around after the water evaporates. You got other people saying it's blowing dust. Had a lot of that. I mean, you put it out, either dust blowing behind the sprayer, or you have a big dust storm, or 20, 30 mile an hour wind after you spray it and you got dust blowing. It will move in the dust. We know that. In my opinion, it's volatiles if the herbicide is volatile. And so I believe that what we've seen in Arkansas is simply volatiles collecting in nighttime inversions and moving in mass. And we're struggling trying to get our hands around how are we going to deal with that. You can just lump a lot of that together and call it secondary movement if you want to, but it's basically things that happen after the spray rig leaves the field. And that's the part that's going to be very difficult to deal with, from a standpoint of education. Okay, another drink of water. I'm going to talk a little bit about volatility without going and trying to bore you with a whole bunch of data. In 2016, we got a label to plant cotton and soybeans in the Mid-South with everybody did, but with no herbicide label. A bunch of our cotton farmers planted it for weed control reasons, said they weren't going to spray it, hoping the stuff got a registration before time to spray it. Well, guess what? It didn't. And when the weeds started growing, we started spraying. And it was very obvious when we started looking at what was going on that a big part of what we were dealing with was volatility. But you turn around and say, okay, but that was Banville and that was Clarity. And so now we got Extendamax coming and we got Ingenia coming, and that's going to solve that problem. And we went into 2017 making that assumption. And Arkansas made the choice to go strictly with Ingenia in 2017. You got the question in the back of your mind, they're lower volatility, but how much lower is low enough if we start spraying a whole bunch more acres than we've ever sprayed before? But we hung our hat on that, and when the landscape effect hit that I was describing a while ago, end of June, first part of July, there was no doubt in my mind, walking fields, that an awful lot of what I was looking at was due to volatility. And so a lot of the university guys started doing a whole bunch of volatility work in 2017. A lot of it is low tunnel volatility stuff. I'm going to show you just a little bit of that. But then they did a lot of different kind of large trial volatility studies. All that stuff's out there on the internet. Some of it they did using soybeans as a bioassay indicator. Some of it they did with air sampling. The work done in Tennessee and the work done in Missouri, they actually did air sampling, measuring how much dicamba was coming off of these plots as opposed to using soybeans. And then simply the chemistry of dicamba itself. We've just always known the herbicide is volatile, and it's volatile to different degrees based on the formulation that you're using. So anyway, that's just an example of what they're calling low tunnel volatility studies, and the only ones I'm going to show you. But they put these little hoops. That field is planted to soybeans, obviously. There's been no dicamba put out there whatsoever. They put those hoops out there. They get away from the trials. They spray flats of soil with these different formulations, put the flats of soil under the tunnels, leave them for about 48 hours, take them out, take the tunnels off, and then just watch what happens to the soybeans over a 21, 28 day period or whatever. There's the data from 3 to 6 studies, 3 out of Arkansas, 2 out of Mississippi, and 1 out of Ohio State, using soybeans, where they're looking at that somewhere around 21 days after they remove the flats, remove the tunnels. Now they're looking at the soybeans in that field, in that plot 21 days later. Extendamax over there on the left with AMS in it. They got that one right. I mean, if you put AMS and Extendamax, then you're going to increase the volatility tremendously. Banville, they used as a standard. All of them had Roundup in them. And then there's Clarity, Ingenia, and Extendamax. And you're just looking, those bars are just relative. They're at the same height. That's about the same degree of soybean injury they had. And what they found was they didn't see the difference between Ingenia and Extendamax that compared to Clarity that we were hoping we were going to see under field conditions. There's some of that's just one look at some of the soybeans side by side. There's Extendamax on the left, Ingenia, Clarity, and the Banville Standard. And if you can see the difference between the 3 on the left, you got a better eye than I can see. And that was pretty consistent across the board in most of the research that I saw this summer. I'm going to just give you Jason Norsworthy, that was his summary, and some of that was his work. This slide I actually took from him. And he's saying, what did we learn from the volatility work we did in 2017? He's saying we can address physical drift through training, but not volatility. And then he goes into some of the factors that influence the degree of volatility. And if you take things like herbicides, tank mix partners, spraying it on vegetation, rate, and number of acres sprayed, all of those things kind of add up. And we're looking at a little bit of all of that, at least in our situation in Arkansas. And I put in italics because that's my comment rather than his. But I think the number of acres sprayed in a given area in a given period of time is the key to what we're looking at and why our situation has been so much worse than the situation in other areas. And then that's just the other comment that he made. is somehow the volatility that at least we saw in the field in 2017 is not being adequately it's not adequately reflecting what we thought we were going to see based on the data that had been conducted. And I don't know of a university researcher at this point that doesn't feel like there's enough volatility coming off of these new formulations to potentially affect soybeans. Okay, why Arkansas? We've kind of been the lightning rod. What's different? What might be different for y'all, compared to us? A lot of different opinions, and everything from we're just a bunch of country bumpkins that don't know how to spray to whatever to everything under the sun. Maybe some of all that's true. It happened to us first, but as it moved further north, then all of a sudden a lot of that country bumpkin stuff kind of went away. But anyway, was Arkansas an aberration? There's the number of complaints. This data was summarized by Kevin Bradley in Missouri, and that's just the number of complaints, official complaints into the regulatory agency in those states. And you can see we set the curve. 986 or whatever, we almost hit 1,000. And but I think most any state up there would tell you. In fact, I heard someone make the comment this morning in Iowa that the number of complaints in Iowa was a record. I think almost any state, regardless of whether they had 100 complaints or 986 like us, would tell you we've never had this many complaints in 1 year on anything.
Ours is 165 now, and those are only Dicamba.
Okay. So anyway, is it just an Arkansas problem? We did set the curve, but it's not just an Arkansas problem, and you can have your own opinion about how many people complain. I mean, I've heard everything, you say the problem's been overblown, but not near all the farmers complain. And, some people have said 10%. Farmers by nature tend to not complain. And so, how much do the official complaint numbers even represent? And then that was Kevin's estimate of the number of affected acres in each one of the states. So again, we kind of set the curve in Arkansas for whatever reason, but it's not just an Arkansas problem. Okay, what's different about Northeast Arkansas that would have made us have 1,000 complaints compared to your 165 or whatever? One, we grow both cotton and soybeans. And so we've got 2 extend crops instead of 1 that we're spraying. We had a higher adoption rate, one due to PPO-resistant Palmer Amaranth. And a lot of our guys haven't been in a Liberty Link program for several years, and they were simply looking for an alternative. So weed control was driving part of it. The other thing is, with all the illegal use we had in 2016, that was an area that got hammered awful hard, so we had a lot more dicamba soybeans planted out of self-defense in that area than we had in other parts of the state. Higher temperatures and humidity. I mean, it just simply gets hotter quicker for us. Humidities are typically higher than they are a lot of different other places. We have a longer planting window. And maybe y'all can use a lot here to help you. And we tend to start planting beans about the middle of March, and we get through right on time about the 1st of August. And now how we manage to do that, I'm not sure, but we do. And we've got a lot more people that are planting early now, but then also keep in mind about 1/3 of our beans are wheat beans. So we're going to plant 1/3 of our soybeans in June irregardless. So we've got soybeans everywhere from being planted to in the reproductive growth stages, maybe side by side or maybe in the same area. Maybe you guys don't have that. Maybe you can compress your planting season up a whole lot more than we can and get a lot of your stuff put out early and help yourself there. Topography. I mean, that area up there is just flat and flat and flat. There's no trees. The fields are huge. There's nothing to stop it. We've got some corn, but we have to learn about every 10 years why most of the corn's grown in the Midwest. And so we don't have the corn to be able to use to break up things and that sort of thing. If it's not in cotton or soybeans, it's probably in rice. And then the last one there, high nighttime inversion frequencies. I don't know, maybe y'all don't have those. I don't know, but in the flat delta, from June, July, and August in Arkansas, we've got an inversion just about every night if the wind's not blowing. And so maybe you guys don't have the inversion frequencies we do. And then, I don't know, my wife makes my slides, and she picked the last one down there at the bottom, see if y'all were awake. But my point being, I don't know about we all, but for us, we get compressed or backed up for some reason, usually weather. And everybody's sitting there packing wheel bearings for the third time. And all of a sudden it breaks, and we got enough equipment to plant the whole state in a week. And I say that with a little bit of a joke, but most of you guys, and you got more tillage and planting equipment than you got anything else, because you can't make a crop, you get it in the ground. And so we can get a tremendous acreage planted in a short period of time, and we simply can't get that many good sprays. If you plant the crop in a week, you got to spray it in a week. And we can't get that many good spray days. So we get backed up there. Just going to pick Mississippi County, Arkansas for an example. Got the square miles up there. 62% of Mississippi County, Arkansas is in cotton and soybeans. Not 62% of the crop, 62% of the land mass is in cotton or soybeans. And then if you look at the acres or estimated percent sprayed with dicamba, those are kind of Monsanto's numbers up there. 67% of the cotton being extend sprayed twice, 42% of the soybean sprayed once. I think those are probably state averages. I would say Mississippi County, those numbers would be higher than that. So you wind up, if you use their numbers, about 39% of the county got sprayed with dicamba. I would say it was probably closer to 50% of the county that got sprayed with dicamba in a relatively short period of time. You guys hadn't been there yet, and that county led the state in the number of complaints. And just to put it in a picture form, anything red, that's Mississippi County, Arkansas. Anything that's red is cotton. Anything that's green is soybeans, just to give you a visual of how much of those two crops are there. And then if you get into green and you're a soybean farmer and you're trying to mix and match extend and non-extend soybeans on a random basis in there, you just got a tough road to hoe. And I hope y'all don't go there. One question we get all the time is, how bad are the yields? And John, I've taken my fair share of the whooping from your company over a statement I made about the 1st of July that said I was concerned that we could have a 25 to 50% yield loss on 1 million acres of soybean in Arkansas. And we cut a record yield. And so, now what did I do wrong? I need technical help, quick. No, there we go. So overall, the yields were much better. That was a prediction I was tickled to death to miss. I've been having to make a lot of predictions that I would love to be wrong on every one of them. Because if I'm wrong, that's an easy fix. If I'm right, it's not going to be an easy fix. But the yields were all over the board, but we cut a record yield. I mean, we had farmers, if you read Twitter, I mean, you got farmers that said, man, I'd have sold out for 40 bushel in a heartbeat, and look at my yield monitor, I'm cutting 75. And we had a lot of that. And especially if they were one-time hits. One-time hits early in the season, you got a great chance of recovery. But a lot of the multiple hits, the yields were just simply all over the board. I mean, a lot of guys were saying, hey, you ought to be happy with 65 bushel. But at the same time, his extends cut 80 or 90. And so the yield thing was all over the board. One thing, and the other one there, is it okay? I've heard companies saying, and I've heard neighbors saying, you made the best soybean crop you've ever made. I didn't hurt it. It didn't hurt anything. Well, who gets to decide that? I mean, if you guys can all get together and your neighbors and say, hey, we're used to some cupping, we're doing it early, we know it's going to not hurt anything, and y'all can agree on that, fantastic, go for it. But to me, the person that's got the cupped beans has the right to decide whether he wants his bean cupped or not. And that's one of the things we're struggling with at home. Additional cost. All of those short beans, Cost most of them, it took another $20 herbicide application because of weeds that came up because they didn't canopy the middles. A lot of sleepless nights, and it's not just a soybean problem. But I use this as a research plot. It's one of Norsworthy's, but it was a system comparison actually sponsored by a retailer, looking at a systems approach and extending Liberty Link beans. That got drifted on before it was ever sprayed. So you can see real easy the Liberty Links and the extends. There it is, looking at it much later in the season. Once we had a miracle July and August, and the recovery in a lot of these fields was tremendous, especially the vegetative recovery. So it wasn't all gloom and doom, but there's a field that cut 20 bushel. Last 2 years it was in soybeans that averaged 75. Rotated with corn, irrigated, you'd look at that field and say that field had to have been sprayed. And that farmer is in the middle of his farm. He bought no dicamba. He used no dicamba. It just got hit multiple times during the year. So that's the flip side of things. Other thing is affecting a lot of different things. One of the things that we're seeing with dicamba compared to 2,4-D, those low, what I'm calling inversion type rates are affecting a lot more species of broadleaf plants than compared to 2,4-D. Almost every tree species that we have in Arkansas at least is show symptoms. That's a sycamore. Also look how high up in the tree the symptoms are. I mean, that tells you the stuff is moving through, and that's just a tree in a town. And we had towns all over eastern Arkansas that there wasn't a tree in the town that didn't show auxin symptoms. Doesn't mean they're gonna die or anything like that, but catalpa trees, peach trees, that's a ginkgo tree on the experiment station at Kaiser, Arkansas that the whole station got hit. And again, it will wear a ginkgo tree out, and look at the top of the tree. Look how high in the tree that this stuff is coming through there. In my opinion, that is not physical drift from a ground rig. It just simply is not. And the tree people are getting much more engaged in this thing, I can tell you. There wasn't a tomato in the garden. And a lot of these little old towns, and the homeowners are just now figuring out what's going on. And I don't think that's a good thing. That's kudzu vine. Y'all aren't blessed with kudzu, but I wouldn't have thought you could have done that to kudzu if you'd have sprayed it with a quart of dicamba. And again, you got symptoms all the way to the top. Kudzu's obviously growing up in a tree. But so anyway, what are the current developments? And I got about 15 minutes to be on out of here on an airplane. But what's going on now? Just to kind of update you on that. One, you can read those. I'm going to take them one at a time. But right now there's a divide between industry and academia that I've never seen. We've always had our differences, but we've always been able to just keep doing research, keep working at it, and maybe nobody was right, nobody was wrong, but whatever the case, the data would eventually sort things out, and everybody could agree. There's a divide right now between academia and industry that I have never seen in the 43 years I've been doing this, and it's primarily over the volatility word. I mean, the academic community is convinced, I think rightfully so, that volatility is playing a part, a significant part, not all of that, but a significant part of what's going on, and obviously industry's opinion is different on that. Another one is simply the seriousness of the problem. I mean, almost any academic guy you want to talk to, or a lot of times even farmers, different people in different states are saying, we've never seen, I don't care whether you're a 5-year guy or a 43-year guy, they're saying we've never seen anything like this in our career. Do we need to hit the reset button? What can we do different? And on the other side of that, we just hired a new coach, and hope he's better than the last one, but you know, his saying right now, it's going to be pedal to the metal in the hammer lane. And so on the flip side of this thing is pedal to the metal in the hammer lane, a little more training, get the learning curve up a little bit, and everything will be fine. There's a huge divide there. You know, new guidelines and more education are not going to fix a volatility problem or a plant sensitivity problem. That's the other side of this thing. Some of these plants are so sensitive, it just puts trying to manage these things on a different plane, and weed guys can't fix those either. If there is a chemistry problem, which I believe some of it is a chemistry problem, it's gonna have, some of it is at least gonna have to be fixed with chemistry. Revised label guidelines, and I'm not gonna dwell on those. I think you're gonna get a whole bunch of that in a little bit. I can tell you this, Arkansas made it a restricted use pesticide 2 years ago. And if it did a lot for us, I can't tell it. Arkansas also put a 10-mile-an-hour wind limit on it 2 years ago. Well, actually 17. Instead of the 15, we put a 10-mile-an-hour wind limit on it. Again, I can't tell that helped us a lot. Reducing the times of spraying, and I've seen that all over the board. I guess now they're saying sunset to sunup or what have you, but basically they're also saying, in our definition of a temperature inversion at home, you need a 2 to 3 mile an hour wind, and you need a 2 to 3 mile an hour temperature rise in the morning. If to make sure you're not getting into an inversion. I'm concerned that reducing the time of spraying could be counterproductive. Because if I'm right, and what we're mainly seeing is volatility collecting in inversions rather than spray particles collecting in inversions, the time of spraying is not going to affect that because this stuff is cooking off over 24 to 72 to 96 hours. But the more you compress the time of spraying, the more you're going to force people to spray in the windiest part of the day. And if you're not going to help the volatility and yet you're going to spray in higher winds, then you could just exacerbate the drift problem there. But we'll figure that out. My question to you would be, can an applicator, if you couldn't follow the guidelines last year, how are you going to follow the guidelines now? I mean, this thing is just very, very complicated. Lawsuits, Hank Williams could write a country song about it. Farmers are suing farmers, farmers are suing chemical companies, insurance companies are suing each other, insurance companies are suing chemical companies, farmers are suing insurance companies. I mean, you can just go on and on, but part of the problem is nobody's stepping up. Everybody's looking at each other over who's responsible for this thing. Lots going to happen with what the insurance companies do. Mark was saying that he had a $25,000 deductible. A lot of insurance companies at home, some paid claims, a lot of them walked away from it. Are insurance companies going to insure people to put it out? I think that's going to be huge in what happens there. I don't know what's going to happen. Our situation specifically, don't go there. You don't want to go through what I've been and what all of us have been through. But Arkansas felt like the reset button had to be set. And they proposed, after 5 years of dealing with this thing, basically proposed an April 15th cutoff, which basically bans the technology. And nobody feels warm and fuzzy about that, I can promise you that. We've been through a public comment period, we've been through a public hearing. After the public hearing, our regulatory agency passed the April 15th cutoff, went to the governor and the legislature 2 days ago. The legislature tabled it, kicked it back to the plant board and said, we don't like April 15th, that's arbitrary. Crap, everything's arbitrary and a bunch of this stuff. I mean, because the science isn't there to specifically define anything. But anyway, I don't know, I have no earthly, I've lived there for 70 years, so nothing that happens in Arkansas, especially after the ledge gets a hold of it, would surprise me at all. I can tell you that during the public comment period, there were 27,000 written comments. And so people say this thing's going to get outside of agriculture. No, it's already outside agriculture. And, Monsanto's suing the plant board, farmers are suing the plant board, so you just kind of go on and on. I had a really empty feeling after that meeting on the April 15th cutoff. We would like to be able to use the technology. This stuff will kill weeds. I'm telling you, the weed control, the fields looked great. I mean, the varieties are good, the weed control was good, but a herbicide simply has to stay where you put it, or you got major environmental issues with it. And just blaming the applicator to me is not the answer. The question is, how do you address volatility? Let's just plant 100% extend. And that'll solve the soybean problem for a year or two. but resistance will take it out in a heartbeat. It also, what about the guy that doesn't want to plant it? He's happy with his liberties or his roundups or his conventionals, or he wants to grow some of these new technology. We didn't have a single breeding plot, whether it was public or private, in the state of Arkansas this year that wasn't hit. There wasn't a variety trial that wasn't hit. There wasn't a seed production field that wasn't hit. And you know, you just go on, and I can assure you the non-ag community is getting much more engaged. Is there a path forward? I hope so. And you know, it's excellent. We can best mare's tail herbicide I've ever seen. You know, when you guys start talking about mare's tail, but you know, several universities are recommending the trait, but not the dicamba. Arkansas, I don't know of any university in the South that's put dicamba in their herbicide recommendations this year in crop in cotton or soybean. It's not because they have an axe to grind, they simply don't know how to recommend it and be able to assure you if you do it this way, the stuff will stay where you put it. Auctions are just complicated. Other states are struggling with regulations. I think Minnesota did something this week. Missouri, North Dakota, everybody is struggling. Last 2 or 3 things. You guys are going to use it. I mean, we need to figure out if we can use it. Some of the things you can do, communicate. I mean, we had some farmers got together and say, we're all going to plant extend beans. We got a nice little river valley here. Let's just all plant extend beans. We've been in Liberty Links 2 or 3 years. Worked out pretty good for them. We had some farmers that got together and said, hey, we're growing some conventionals, we're growing some food beans. Let's don't anybody plant any extend beans. We had that situation. But I think you're going to have to communicate good enough to block these technologies up together. I think as long as you've got a hodgepodge of extend and non-extend beans, you're at least going to have cupping. Now, what that amounts to, y'all have to figure that out. Use your corn, you know, to block it up where you can, plant early. I think what Iowa is recommending it pre but not post. I mean, plant early. The other thing is load up on residuals. One of the things that our farmers on Extend are thinking is, hey, this is Roundup Ready all over again, so it's easy. We'll spray Roundup Extend burn down. We'll spray, you know, Roundup Extend post, Roundup Extend or Ingenia or whatever post. It's not that simple. Load up on residuals, and maybe you don't have to spray any extend or any dicamba in crop. I mean, there's some things you can do there. But I know this, we got to get it right in 2018 or there's a good chance this technology won't be around. Where does it end? I wish I knew the answer, because I can assure you I'm ready. I don't enjoy being a lightning rod, and I have been. It's divided farmers at home like nothing I've ever seen in my life. I mean, you got 50% that want it and 50% that don't want it, and nobody's budget. It's dividing ag and non-ag, and we're not talking about people just pissed off at each other. We're talking about anger. I mean, just pure anger between companies and university guys, anger between farmers. In fact, and I don't dwell on this a lot, but we did have a killing in 2016, and that trial is actually going on this week. Don't do that. Don't shoot each other over herbicide. So, you know, the bottom line is the secondary movement part of this thing is hard to deal with, and I could just about tell you the more you spray, the more off-target issues you're potentially going to see. And the last thing is, are there conditions that you can spray large acreages in a short period of time and keep it on target? And we're struggling with that. Is there a magic buffer? Everybody's looking for a magic temperature. Is it 80 degrees? Is it 85 degrees? Once you decide something's volatile, it's kind of like being a little bit pregnant. I mean, it just is volatile, and you got to figure out how to try to deal with that. Big question is, if the label's followed and damage occurs, who makes the damaged person whole? We're struggling with that big time at home. It's going to take everybody working together, and it's going to take more than the companies telling the regulatory people it's your problem, fix it. It's going to take everybody working together to try to make this thing work. I hope y'all can make it work. I haven't come to make you a pessimistic presentation. I'm just trying to tell you what's happened to us. hopefully you can look at what's happened to us, look at our situation, figure out how y'all can do things different, and everything will be lovely.
Okay, we have time for seriously only about 2 or 3 questions for. I need to get him in a car.
Hearing none?
You said something about you have higher humidity down there. Seen some studies that talk about low humidity causing more volatilization than higher humidity.
I don't know how to answer that, but the stuff that I've seen, higher humidity tends to make things worse. But there's a lot to learn. I mean, there's a lot to learn.
Is there anything you can spray on it foliar to have it come out of that quicker?
It was a boom for what I call a snake oil salesman at home, but realistically, what I've seen dealing with a lot of herbicide issues through the years, and it doesn't really matter what it is, it pretty much just takes time. I mean, the plant has to degrade the herbicide on its own, and once it degrades it, it's going to grow out of it to the extent that it can. I never recommended any kind of additives at home. I'm not saying there wasn't any. I mean, there's some people that sprayed some that I guess when they spent all that money on it, they had to believe it helped, and maybe it did, but realistically, in my opinion, no. I think you're just dealing with the plant's got to break it down, and when it breaks it down, it's got to start growing out of it, and then it's going to strictly depend on what kind of growing conditions do you have after that. We had a miracle July and August. Had we had a normal July and August, then I don't think our situation would have turned out as good as it did from a yield standpoint.